Hey guys, look, they're shouting out the channel. All right, everybody calm down, calm down. I know you're just foaming at the mouth, wanting to see what I picked up from the Last Bookstore. I really love the Last Bookstore. I got to go there once a couple years ago, and I got to go again. Shout out to Mackenzie and Angie. But I'll show you guys what I picked up very briefly. So the first one I got was From a Broken Bottle, Traces of Perfume Still Emanate by Nathaniel McKay. This is kind of like, it's supposed to be kind of like this lyrical prose literary reflection on music written by a character who goes by N, in the form of these letters written to this kind of elusive figure called the Angel of Dust. This is kind of obscure. What really forced me to pick it up was that somebody from New York Times was giving this blurb on the back, and they say that there's a cliche about music writing, sometimes attributed to Thelonious Monk among others, saying writing about music is like dancing about architecture. And then he goes on to say that Nathaniel McKay successfully like danced about architecture. I think this kind of goes deeper on the more like intellectual side of like music theory and stuff. I am not versed on any of that. I really love music, and I really love words, and I'm hoping those two will be kind of enough to get me through this. And I know a couple people were saying that kind of like knowledge of jazz and stuff like that helps your appreciation for this book more, and I'm intrigued. So I'm willing to give anything interesting a try, even if it's a little difficult. On recommendation from one of you suckers, I picked up Kane from Jean Toomer. I'm back on my like wanting to read the catalog of all the writers that came out of the Harlem Renaissance, and so one of you guys suggested this to me in that vein, and I'm ready. It's like super short. I'm ready to dive in. I really like this cover too. I've been reading and rereading, as I will talk about a little bit more later, love of my life, Langston Hughes. And then last but definitely not least, I picked up the selected poems of Jorge Luis Borges. A lot of you guys know I like truly head over heels fell in love with Borges last year. Before he kind of committed to the form of the short story, he was a prolific poet, and this is like his younger years. I'm so just I don't know how much more in love I can fall with this guy's writing. Like, I'm really so pleasantly surprised. A lot of the same themes that are within his short stories are reappearing in his poems, but they're so different. I feel like it's just a completely different side of him. I mean, he is younger when he's writing these, but I don't know. He just his poems come with the surprising clarity and simplicity that I kind of wasn't expecting, just because if you've ever read Borges, you know that he's kind of dense and a little complicated, and I'm loving how kind of simple and beautiful these are. There's already one in there that I really want to commit to memory. It's called Death Watch on the South Side, and I have read that about 6 times already, and I'm really in love with that. So those are the books that I got from the Last Bookstore. Let's talk about the books that I've been reading. Before we do that, I want to know what you guys have been reading. I feel like it's been a long time since I've just committed myself to like come to the camera and just talk about books. I've made like 3-4 videos this entire year. Not my best work, I'll say that. Let's just keep this casual. I want to know what you guys are reading right now. You know what to do. Let me know down below. First book I want to talk about, Love of My Life, Fyodor Dostoevsky. I read The Idiot. I have mentioned this in a couple videos past that I was reading it. This is my 3rd Dostoevsky. I read Karamazov, I read Crime and Punishment, and this is the 3rd that I'm adding to my list. And it is so far my least favorite Dostoevsky, but I think I'm gonna have to reread it, and there's a couple reasons why I think I'm gonna have to reread it. The first reason, I was reading this while my mom was dying, in the hospital. And then I finished it a couple weeks after she was dead, after she had died. And I feel like my concentration levels at that time were very, understandably just not, I was not in the zone. So I think that for that fact alone, it does this book a disservice, because my mind was a million miles a minute and processing a lot of stuff. So I feel like I didn't get the deserved attention and maybe focus that a work and a person like Dostoevsky deserves. The other thing I was having a hard time doing with this book is the plot of this book involves a very kind of beautifully crafted, innocent character who is renowned for his goodness and his likability and his innocence. And what Dostoevsky does is he places this very innocent, supposedly non-divine, Christ-like figure into 19th century seedy, tumultuous, corrupt Russia, and we basically watch him fall apart as a reader. I think one of the disconnects I was having with this book, besides just reading it at a kind of a bad time, is that I was really having a hard time kind of connecting Prince Mishkin to this like non-divine Christ-like character, and it was hard for me to see Mishkin and Christ as like synonymous, just because while Mishkin is very good and he's very innocent, which, you know, a lot of the book centers around, which Christ, you know, whether you're looking at him as purely as a historical figure or looking at him through like a religious lens, is both good and innocent. For me, Prince Mishkin was naive a lot of the time, and so this kind of threw me off, because one of the things that I would never describe Christ or Jesus Christ as is naive, and I felt like there was lots of moments where Mishkin was just plain naive. So I was having a hard time like connecting the two, and I feel like that threw off what I think he was trying to say in the story. I will say, even though this is my least favorite Dostoevsky, okay, I still cried about it. Like, he still emotionally affected me on a level where, you know, tears were streaming. And if you've read this book, it was at the end, obviously, the last scene with Prince Mishkin. And if you know, you know, and if you don't, you should read it. But I still, I need to reread it. I'm just gonna say I need to reread it. Yeah, I'm still immensely in love with Dostoevsky, and you know, that'll never change. I actually have a DNF for y'all, which I don't really usually have DNFs for you guys. You guys know that I'm pretty much a kind of a stickler when it comes to finishing books. Like, I will usually finish it, but this one, it's Severance by Ling Ma. I'm kind of mad about this one because I was really excited to read this one. It's an apocalypse novel. There's like a pandemic going on. There's something called Shin. Is it called the Shin Fever? Oh, the Shen fever. It's kind of sweeping through, killing lots of people, and this woman who lives this kind of very, you know, normal life in New York City ends up kind of staying behind when basically the whole entire city has evacuated, to kind of take on this persona online of what they call the New York City ghosts. And she goes around and photographs the abandoned city and keeps this blog that a lot of people are following. And then eventually she does have to like try to learn how to survive, and she meets this group of survivors, yada yada. It sounds really good. It sounds very intriguing. It sounds right up my alley. Everyone loves a good post-apocalyptic novel these days, but for some reason, man, I couldn't get behind this. The plot was thin. Even though there's like a huge pandemic going on, it felt very thin. The writing was so flat, and the best way that I can describe it is it feels corporate. The writing feels painfully corporate, and I swear your writing can be anything but corporate when it comes to me. I swear, be the most pretentious, ununderstandable, difficult writing that is completely over the regular average human's head and just be completely arrogant. And I would rather delve into that than this kind of corporate jargon type of stuff. I don't know. It wasn't corporate jargon like actually in the book. That's just kind of the vibe that I'm trying to press on to you guys of how it felt to read this book. I just couldn't be bothered to care. I just can't explain it. So I'm very sorry. I'm sorry. Severance by Ling Ma. I was super excited to read that one too. Like genuinely, I really wanted to get into that, and the premise was extremely intriguing, but it just didn't come through for me. Let's talk about what else I got here. I was a little bit on an NYRB wave. First, let's talk about quickly about A High Wind in Jamaica. I already made a whole long video all about A High Wind in Jamaica by Richard Hughes, so I'm not gonna go too deep into this one, but I really like this one. We follow this I'm really interested in stories revolving around children who feature like children main characters, and I just find that really interesting. I'm kind of collecting a little compendium or a little bit of list of books that are kind of like that I want to put into a video. This was kind of an interesting sort of coming of age story revolving around this group of children who are living in Jamaica right at the kind of beginning years after emancipation. The infrastructure of society is kind of collapsing. The plantations are decaying because there's no one to really work them. And I will say, like, the very first part of this book was so memorable. Just the imagery of this like stifling heat and the kind of free roaming lives that these children are living was super vivid and kind of like enviable in a way. I mean, a little bit, not really. I kind of regret saying that. It was a little bit scary because, like I said, things are kind of decaying, but it's kind of like decaying in the jungle heat, and there's just really naive innocence that these kids carry with them because, you know, they're not really critically thinking about a lot of stuff. You know, they're not heavily affected by these huge issues like slavery and, you know, money and all this stuff. They're kind of just living their lives kind of blindly, which is something that is, I think, what people miss the most about childhood, is this kind of like blind living no matter what your situation is. And Richard Hughes did a really good job of portraying kind of the indifference of children a lot. There's this one part where this kind of hurricane happens, which is the catalyst to their parents sending these children back to England because it's like, it's too dangerous out here. And the kids are kind of oblivious that anything really super bad happened. And it was just a very memorable section. Anyway, the kids on their way to England, it's not a very smooth trip. They end up getting captured by some IRL pirates, and the story kind of spirals out of control from there. A lot of interesting themes, including Richard Hughes was kind of dead set on pinpointing that exact moment where you stop that kind of blind living that you experience as a child into like being self-aware. And he actually pinpoints that exact moment in the book for one of the main characters and narrates it, which is super cool. I've never read anything kind of similar in that vein. It's kind of giving Lord of the Flies a little bit. The ending was super, I think, kind of poignant. If anyone's read this and they've read the ending, I'd be interested in discussing what you think about that ending. Great book. Great book. You should totally read it. All right, let's talk about an author that I really fell in love with these past couple months. And his name is Sean Williams. If you're anywhere around BookTube or anywhere around some of the circles of readers that I kind of frequent, you've probably heard about John Williams. You've probably heard about Stoner, which I read this one first, and then I picked up Butcher's Crossing on the recommendation of Sean from Travel Through Stories. I think John Williams is super interesting. Him as an author is super interesting. He wrote technically four novels that are so different in setting and like subject matter, and these two that I've read are both absolutely brilliant. And so his scope in just that area alone is really interesting. This is kind of about a scholar of English literature and his life at a university, and this one is, you know, taking it back to the wild west in the 1870s on a huge buffalo hunt. And then his third novel is Augustus, which goes into the kind of secrets of ancient Rome. Completely different settings, completely different books, and these two were so good. Sean said that I told him, he had posted about it, and I told him I was like crying, sobbing after reading Stoner, and he said if I thought this was good, I had to pick up his other books. And I think Sean said that while he thinks Stoner is great, that John Williams' other books might be even better. I really love both of these. Gun to my head, I'm going with Stoner. This one's very, very close behind. But let's talk about the book. So it's about an intellectual man who is born into a very poor farming family, and he kind of has no prospects for his life outside of that. He kind of has come to terms like this is what his life's going to be. He's going to take after his father. He's going to help with the farm. He's going to become a farmer himself. He decides to go to school for like some agricultural degree or something of the like, and ends up finding out that he is in love with literature. It's such a great discovery for him, and I think that this book is really popular among readers, obviously, because of that. You know, it's a little bit of a relation thing, because the way that Stoner is so in love with words and the power of language and books is just relatable to anyone who loves reading. This book is described as very quiet, and it is. The story is super simple and very unassuming, very surface level kind of life, but John Williams really kind of gives us this really compelling look into the inner person that Stoner is. He is really passionate about reading and writing and literature, but he's not all that great of a teacher, and he has the beginnings, or what he feels like the beginnings of, his true love with this woman, but their marriage doesn't really work out the way he thinks it is, and he's completely smitten head over heels with his daughter, but family life and life starts happening, and I don't know, I think it's just a really interesting portrait of a man, and I think that what made me really love this book and Stoner was just kind of the discrepancy there is between the appearance of Stoner as a person to sometimes the reader and mostly to the people who surround him, and then kind of how rich and emotional and deep and beautiful his inner life is, and they're not always synonymous with each other. Something about that is super comforting. I don't know, because I think we all have ideas about how we want to appear or things we want to do, and you know, whatever we put out is what gets perceived, but it's not always the truth. And I just, oh my god, I'm actually tearing up. I need to stop. I was crying about at midnight after reading this book. Just the last scene, this will be like the last, oh my god, the last chapters, just like this reflection of the simple life and the simple man who had passions and loves and desires and goals like all the rest of us, and what it all comes to. And it's sad, but it's also not that sad, because in a way, you know, there are ways that Stoner's life may be perceived to have failed, but there's also a lot of ways where I feel like he was successful, and it had nothing to do with anything externally. It was only internally. So many beautiful passages, revelations, observations, and there's reflections about love and, you know, jobs and war and marriage, and there's just, I loved it. I loved it so much. If you hear people talking about Stoner and talking about how good it is, it's because they're right. It's super unassuming on the surface. It doesn't sound like something that's immediately like super like, oh, I gotta read that. But when you do, you kind of understand why this book has like a cult following, because there's something kind of ineffable about what John did here, and it was really, really good. And I picked up Butcher's Crossing, which is completely different. This kind of was filling the big, I should say, hole in my heart that Lonesome Dove has left. I really need to read the rest of that quartet, okay, because I've been thinking about it for years. I just haven't gotten to it. But we have this interesting book, which involves a really young 20-something named Will Andrews, who decides to kind of pull up to this small Kansas town called Butcher's Crossing, and he drops out of Harvard to do this. It's a very big, very intentional step that he makes because he's on the search for something. What is that thing he's searching for? Nobody knows. He doesn't even know. And he just has this feeling that there's something more out there, and it can be discovered through nature, through his connection to nature and the sort of adventure that he has in his head that he wants to have. I love the main character in this book for his youngness and his naivete and his like hunger for life, which a lot of young people have, including myself sometimes. I don't know. What does John Williams do? He kind of demystifies the Wild West, which kind of Larry McMurtry did as well in Lonesome Dove in a way. He kind of hooks up with this ragtag group of people, and they decide to go on this long buffalo hunt, which is really bloody and scary. A wonderful image of what capitalist society, or like the kind of the beginnings of a certain type of capitalistic society pushes people to do. And it's this really kind of harrowing destruction of nature turned into man versus nature, and exploring questions that all great books eventually delve into, which is this kind of quintessential search for meaning. Really super well done. Just a lot of striking imagery. John Williams has this really interesting writing style, which is very simple, easy, flowy, but also beautiful, and reminds me of Murakami a little bit. I don't want that comparison to go too hard because I really just kind of hate Murakami's work, but I'm just comparing that certain essence of the writing. This book goes crazy. This book goes hard. It gets really intense at some parts, and you kind of don't know what's gonna happen. It was beautiful, and I think the message at the heart of this story is a little bit depressing, but I think it's needed if supplemented with a certain type of optimism. I will say this book ends on a pretty dire note, but John Williams has just been, he just like hit one out of the park and then hit another one out of the park. He's been just super impressive to me. I love him. I'm gonna read Augustus, even though I have absolutely no interest in ancient Rome, but I'm gonna do it for John. We're gonna dive into poetry, guys. Let's talk about the poetry I've been reading. I have a couple collections to come at you guys with. So let's start with these. I'll kind of go through them, and then maybe I can tell you guys what I'm currently reading, and then we'll wrap this thing up. Okay, first, I'll put a picture up here because I've been reading a lot of these poetry collections on Scribd, which is a library app that I subscribe to. This isn't sponsored like it ever would be. So that's where I've been kind of reading all these books. So I don't have physical copies of all of them, but I'll put them up on the screen for you guys to get a good look at. First one I want to talk about, love of my life. I talked about him for a second at the beginning of the video, but I read Langston Hughes' debut collection, The Weary Blues, and was it everything that I wanted and more. I have loved Langston Hughes for a while. I have a collection of his stuff somewhere on my shelves, but I have by no means read through his entire catalog of work. So getting to kind of go to the genesis of his, you know, poetic career and delving into this was such a treat for me. I can't explain how much it really meant to me to be reading this beautiful collection. He wrote this while he was 23, published it when he was 24, which is the same age that I am now. So that just added this other layer of kind of complete awe and respect for this craft that he is just so good at. Langston Hughes, one of the best things to come out of the Harlem Renaissance, am I right, ladies? It was so romantic, and his writing is so sultry, and I love him because he really possesses this quality of being like so full of joy, but also sad at the same time and serious, but also very unserious. Super kind of lyrical stuff. Not a lot of his stuff is super drawn out. A lot of his poems are very short, but they're so lyrical. They have this like I said, this sultry lyrical quality. I've already committed to memory a couple of my favorite lines. I don't know, he's so full of life, man. He's so full of life. It's just, I don't understand how anyone could read this guy and just not feel like he has transferred upon you the exact feelings that he was feeling. And I love this guy. I love him so much. I bought another one of his collections this past week, which I'm excited to delve into. I can't wait to read through his entire body of work. He is everything. I would really like to marry him if I got the chance. Anyone have Langston Hughes' number? Hit me up. Let's talk about what else. Okay, I read The War of the Foxes by Richard Sykin. I discovered this one through my library app called Scribd. So apparently he wrote a popular collection. He came out of Yale. He won some like Yale Poets Award, something like that. Don't quote me on all this. Called Crush. Haven't read it, but I think that's what kind of skyrocketed him or gave him a little bit of notoriety among the poet circle. Haven't read that one, but I picked up this one and I was impressed. I was impressed. This is, of all the poetry collections that I'm going to talk about today, is the one that I feel the most that I need to reread. But I really enjoyed his writing is not very lyrical at all, which is something that I do look for, especially in poetry, right? Because I feel like that's kind of a big part of it for me, and maybe just poetry in general. But something about this guy's way he talks is really intriguing. And what I kind of described it as, I felt like he was giving voice. He was giving... Oh my God. He was giving voice to that space between sleeping and waking, where you're kind of going through these very bizarre thoughts that are kind of just piling up on each other one by one. And while there's still a part of you that kind of knows right in between that space that these thoughts are not 100% right, but they still make sense at the same time. You guys know exactly what I'm talking about. The War of the Foxes felt like that. It felt like very fable-esque, and there was a lot of moments where I just stopped and I'll be like, wow, that line was really good. That was such an interesting way to say that. I do think this one needs a reread, just because it was that space between sleep and wake where I need to decipher more. But I really liked it. I was really into it. Like I said, his writing is not super lyrical, but the fact that I really liked it and it wasn't lyrical kind of attests to kind of the potency of it. And yeah, give it a try. I'm gonna have to give Crush a try too. Let's talk about The Book of Longing by Leonard Cohen. So I didn't know before I started reading this that Leonard Cohen wrote Hallelujah, which, if you ever listen to the lyrics of that song, they're so poignant, right? They're so haunting. And so his poetry was just on par with like those devastating, beautiful lyrics of Hallelujah. Really, really love this. I read this at just the perfect time in my headspace that I really needed to hear Leonard Cohen talking. I really appreciated the kind of differences between our lives, just because he's like an older man looking back and reflecting on a lot of moments. And it's like I said, this collection, which I think is one of the last ones, maybe even the last one that he put out before his death, was really reflective and slow and pretty sad. This whole thing was very sad. It felt very serious, very somber, but I needed that. I needed that vibe. I can't explain exactly why. And it felt like I'm younger and I'm on the precipice of a lot of stuff. And so I appreciated the voice of someone older and wiser, kind of reflecting on his life in a very beautiful way. It was, like I said, it felt very serious at times, and I don't know why, I really, 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 really loved this collection. I can't wait to read more Leonard Cohen, and I already kind of want to start rereading that one. All right, I got one more to talk about, baby, and then I can kind of wrap up what I've been reading, and then we can call this a year. I read Orangutan Teeth by Trev Semensky. This one's kind of controversial. I'll tell you why. This is from a guy who I discovered on TikTok, who is part of a generation of people that you younguns might know as the Instagram poet. The Instagram poet is a very controversial topic. It was, especially a couple years ago, with like the rise of Rupi Kaur and all of that. I don't know if you guys ever read her or anything. It's kind of a big subject, because Instagram poetry, if you don't know, is kind of poetry that is written specifically to be digested online, you know, specifically through Instagram, or, you know, with the rise of like TikTok and stuff. And I only paid like $4 for this collection, so I'm not like too ticked off that it really wasn't that good. So I'd heard a couple poems by Trev Semensky through TikTok, which I thought were really beautiful. This book did not contain any of that, and kind of played into a lot of the Instagram poet tropes, which, if you don't know, they're kind of criticized for being like overly simplistic and super amateur. I don't know if that's the right word. There are a couple in here that I liked, but it felt, sometimes the poetry just feels really lazy and so underdeveloped and very surface level, and a lot of, you know, people were pissed off with this kind of rise of the Instagram poetry, because there was a lot of like, that's not poetry, which, I mean, we're getting into some dicey ground if we're going to start, you know, saying what is poetry and what is not poetry. I think that everyone, whether you're a big fan of Instagram poets or you like freaking Rupi Kaur, or you like, you know, T.S. Eliot, you know, there's an idea that there is some objectivity, right? Like, there's a spectrum of good and bad. I mean, when it comes to art, like this discussion will literally never end. It's like the same conversation people were having about Instagram poets is the same conversation that people were having about like modern art, you know? So, I mean, it gets really dicey. All I can really do is give you my opinion, which is like, I don't think this was that good. He literally starts off his introduction with something which I, as a poetry reader, especially someone who literally bought this from him, I mean, yes, it was on sale for $4, but that's not the point. I still, like, you know, gave him money, saying, I'm sorry if you don't like poetry. I don't care for it a lot of the time either. Oh my God, please keep the disrespect to a minimum. My son, my king, my little Instagram poet, don't do that. I'm literally buying your book to read your poetry, and you're gonna start off the book by saying something which is sacrilegious in the world of poetry. I don't really care for poetry. How dare you? And you know what? Trev, I could kind of tell you didn't really care about poetry that much, but I have this book. There's about 100 pages in this book. I liked like 10-12% of it. I did think some of them were good. I don't think that he's a lost cause, and I do think he's better than the average Instagram poet, whatever that means or doesn't mean. I don't want to step on any toes here. Let me read you one that I thought was good, okay? Let you guys let me know what you think of it. There were a couple good ones in here. I feel like he has talent, but he's a little bit caught up in some other stuff. This one's called Good Morning. Good morning. Wake up and good morning, anyone. I slept in again, which I love to do, which I hate to do, which is how I do anything. I want to say good morning to someone, but there's no one here. And if there was, they would probably scoff, because for them, morning is over. They woke up early, which they love to do, which they hate to do, which is none of my business. And sometimes people just scoff with their eyes. And sometimes it's just all in my head. And sometimes I wake up in the dark. And that's my least favorite. I thought that was good. So I'd be hit with that, and I'd be like, oh, that's pretty good. Like, that's not bad. Not bad at all. And then I would read this. Olive hates bananas, but she buys them. She buys them in bunches. She says they give her the creeps. Doesn't like their vibes. Okay, so you guys know what I was dealing with. That's what I was dealing with, okay. All right, guys, is that it? Is that everything I've done? Yes, it is. Now all I need to do is show you guys what I'm currently reading. I'm kind of dipping in and out of a couple stuff right now. I've even been reading some books simultaneously throughout all of this wrap up. But first and foremost, it's something I already showed, which is the collective works or the selected poems of Jorge Luis Borges. Really loving this, super savoring kind of every moment I'm getting with this. I'm reading a poem and then rereading it like 2 or 3 more times before even moving on. I've said it before and I'll say it again, I'm like super jealous of anyone who gets to read Jorge Luis Borges in Spanish. I'm super jealous of you. I'm just super jealous of you. Okay, what else am I reading right now? Kind of the meat of the lesson, which I'm getting into right now, 600 pages into The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. Oh, this is so good. It's so epic. I can't explain how much I need this story in my life right now, how good it is. It feels so, if you don't know, this is like a high fantasy, it's a pretty popular high fantasy series, and this is the first one. Like I said, I'm about 600 pages in, and it just feels so classic in the best way possible. You know, the world of literature, especially my specific tastes, are just embedded and surrounded with like the very popular, I think, morally ambiguous character. And I love a good morally ambiguous character, but this feels so like heroes versus villains, and like fight for honor and protect my family and rise up from the trenches, I don't care what it takes type of energy that I am immensely enjoying, on top of like some amazing world building and a whole bunch of like mystery and intrigue and, you know, a diverse cast of characters. And I don't even know how the fact that I'm even sitting here talking to you guys instead of reading this right now, you should count as a blessing, because I'm literally at just such a good part in this book right now. I don't even know why I'm not reading right now. That's what I should go do. That's what I'm going to do exactly after this video, because I need to jump back into this. I am pretty much so in love with this. I have very, very high hopes for the rest of the series, and I understand why this is immensely popular, and I'm so thankful to be on this journey with Brando Sando. And last but not least, I am slowly working my way through finally finishing up for the 3rd time the Book of Disquiet by the love of my life, Fernando Pessoa. I talked about this book last year because I restarted my 3rd reread of it last year, and then I kind of set it down, and I'm finally picking it back up at the tail end of this year to kind of wrap it up for the 3rd time. But the first time reading the Margaret Costa translation, because the first 2 times I read the translation by Richard Zenith. I take Pessoa in kind of waves. This is not a traditional novel, so it's very hard to kind of sit down and read it all through one piece like you would do with a traditional novel, because he kind of exists outside of the bounds of that. But yeah, let's just say every time I pick this up I start crying. Let's just say that. Okay, so that's kind of what I'm doing right now. What I want to know what you guys are reading as well. I hope this video makes it to see the light of day, and as always, happy reading, losers.